Imagine living under a monarch that spread such terror amongst the people that even the mention of her name would make the bravest warriors tremble with fear. A monarch that ruled with an iron fist, and anyone who dared oppose her would face the most gruesome of ends. From taking the throne by force to burning Protestants at the stake. This is the story of Queen Bloody Mary. How she rose to power before the blood. We're talking about the real-life Queen Mary I of England, who lived during the 16th century. You might be wondering how evil one has to be to get the name Bloody Mary. Well, that's exactly what we're here to discuss today. So, join us as we navigate the twists and turns of Queen Mary I's life. Mary I of England, born in 1516, was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Now, Henry VIII is famous for having more than a few marriages, and Mary was his daughter from his first wife. Family drama, anyone? You bet. As Mary grew up, England was going through some serious religious changes. Her dad had a bit of a disagreement with the Pope, so he decided to create his own church, the Church of England. This move made England a Protestant nation, but little Mary here was a die-hard Catholic, like really devoted. Now, fast forward to 1553. Mary's younger brother, Edward VI, sat on the throne after their dad passed away. But here's the twist. Edward was a staunch Protestant, and before his untimely death, he made some sneaky moves to prevent Mary from becoming queen. Sibling rivalry at its finest, eh? But life sure can throw a curveball, and Edward's plan went up in smoke. Mary managed to rally some support, kicked Lady Jane Grey off the throne, and she was queen for like 9 days, and claimed her spot as the rightful Queen of England. So, where does the name Bloody Mary come from? Now, let's get to the juicy part, the nickname. Picture this, Mary's heart was set on turning England back into a Catholic nation, and boy oh boy did she mean business. But unfortunately, not everyone shared her enthusiasm. See, there were these pesky Protestants who didn't quite agree with Mary's religious vision. So what does a determined queen do when faced with religious dissent? Well, she takes a non-nonsense approach, right? Well, that's exactly what Mary did. She cracked down on the Protestant dissenters, and things got pretty messy. Hundreds of people were persecuted, and many were even executed for heresy. And that, my friends, is how the nickname Bloody Mary was born. But hold your horses. Before you start thinking Mary was a heartless monster, it's essential to understand the context. Back then, religious tensions were at an all-time high, and loyalty to the crown was a matter of life or death. It was a tough time to be a ruler, no doubt about it. You see, Mary was a die-hard Catholic, like the I will go to Mass even if the world was ending kind of Catholic. Religion was like the GPS of her reign, guiding every move and taking her on a spiritual roller coaster ride. When she ascended to the throne in 1553, she was determined to bring England back to its Catholic roots. But unfortunately, England was knee-deep in the Protestant pool at that time. So, did the Queen take things too far? Well, she took some pretty drastic measures. First on her to-do list, get rid of these pesky laws that made England a Protestant nation. It sounds simple, but it was pretty tough. She had to convince Parliament to play ball, and those guys weren't easy to convince. But that wasn't all. Mary had her sights set on something bigger, undoing the religious reforms that her father, Henry VIII, and her younger brother, Edward VI, had put in place. She wanted a religious rewind, and she wasn't going to stop until England was singing Gregorian chants in its sleep. She started by bringing back the good old Latin Mass, just like the good old days. And she didn't stop there. Mary was all about the bells and whistles, so she dusted off those fancy Catholic vestments and brought back the stunning church decorations. Obviously, not everyone was on board with Mary's grand religious revival. Remember those pesky Protestants we mentioned earlier? Yeah, they weren't too thrilled about the whole thing. So Mary put her foot down and decided to make religious dissent illegal. As you can imagine, things got real intense real quick. Mary passed some seriously strict laws against those who dared to speak against her religious agenda. We're talking fines, imprisonment, and even execution for those who refused to get on the Catholic bandwagon. And that is how Bloody Mary earned her reputation. Her fanatical pursuit of Catholicism and her brutal methods to achieve it left a trail of bloodshed and fear. As we mentioned before, the Protestants were Mary's prime targets. It was like a religious game of hide and seek, and she was determined to seek out and silence anyone who dared to oppose her Catholic vision. England was filled with religious tensions, and those who stuck to their Protestant beliefs were in for a rough ride. It didn't matter if they were commoners or high-ranking officials, Mary was out to get them all. Now imagine you're a brave Protestant preacher, standing up for your beliefs, preaching about religious freedom, like a true rebel. Well, Mary's regime wasn't too keen on your rebellious sermons. They would swoop in, arrest you faster than you can say Old Testament, and put you on trial for heresy. Not exactly the kind of trial you'd want to attend. Trust me. So what happened to these poor souls? Well, let's just say it wasn't a walk in the park. Many were found guilty and sentenced to a fiery fate, burning at the stake. The consequences of the Marian persecutions were far-reaching. First and foremost, there was the loss of human life. Families were torn apart, communities shattered, and fear loomed like a dark cloud over England. The burnings sent shock waves through the Protestant community, and many fled the country seeking refuge in more tolerant lands. And can you blame them? No one wants to be on the menu for a religious roast. Martyrs of the stake, the gruesome executions. So, let's talk a bit more about these gruesome executions during Mary I's reign. Fair warning, it's not for the faint of heart. Now, when it came to executing these poor souls, found guilty of heresy, Mary's regime had quite the fiery method up its sleeve. Burning at the stake. Yeah, you heard it right. It was like a barbecue party from hell. But don't worry, there won't be any recipe sharing today. So how did these executions go down? Well, picture this. A public spectacle filled with fear and terror. First, the accused would be paraded through the streets, surrounded by an anxious crowd, to make an example of what had happened to anyone who opposed the Queen. Then, they'd be tied to a stake, with bundles of wood stacked around them. It was like a horrifying bonfire, except there were no marshmallows to roast here. Just a heart-wrenching scene that sent shivers down the spines of onlookers. Now here comes the darkest part. Before the flames were lit, the accused would often be given a chance to recant their heretical beliefs and embrace the Catholic faith. But you see, these brave souls were willing to face the fire rather than betray their convictions. Talk about standing firm in the face of death. Once the flames were set ablaze, their death was far from quick and painless. It was a slow and agonizing process as the fire engulfed their bodies. It's hard to imagine the pain and suffering they faced, since it's scientifically proven that burning alive is the most painful way to die. Now, let's take a moment to understand the psychological impacts of such a horrific execution method. Just think about it. Witnessing someone burning alive would leave an indelible mark on the minds of the onlookers. Fear, trauma, and horror would linger long after the smoke had cleared. For those accused, the psychological torment must have been unimaginable. Facing death in such a brutal and public manner, with the weight of religious persecution on their shoulders, was nothing short of a harrowing ordeal. It's a testament to their unwavering faith and courage in the face of this terror. These executions reveal the consequences of extremism and intolerance, and they serve as a dark reminder of the importance of religious freedom and respect for diverse beliefs, things which Queen Mary did not know a lot about. Oh, and the terror train isn't stopping quite yet. Queen Mary I's foreign policy decisions and personal tragedies just added a generous dose of horror to her reign. Now, Mary had quite a tangled web of foreign relations to navigate. She was married to Philip II of Spain, and let's just say they didn't have a lot of cozy date nights. You see, Mary was head over heels in love with her husband, but Philip had his eyes on something else, the good old Spanish Empire. Mary was so eager to please her Spanish suitor that she even involved England in Spain's wars. Things with her husband, however, did not improve because of it. Philip was still more interested in ruling Spain than being a loving husband, and as if that weren't enough, Mary had to endure the heartache of not having any children. Yeah, no heir to the throne meant no happily ever after for her reign. Now you might be wondering how that made things worse. Well, Mary's foreign policy decisions and personal tragedies made her more desperate to hold on to her power. When you mix desperation with religious fanaticism, well, you've got a recipe for disaster. Her opposition to the Protestants was already bad, but the terror didn't stop at home. Involving England in Spain's wars not only drained the kingdom's resources, but also sowed seeds of discontent among her subjects. Imagine being taxed to fund someone else's war. Definitely not a crowd pleaser. And as if the terror buffet wasn't enough, Mary's failure to produce an heir opened the door for her half-sister, Elizabeth, to ascend to the throne. Now, Elizabeth was a savvy queen to be, and she played her cards right. As Mary's health declined, Elizabeth started building support among the people and the nobles. On November the 17th, 1558, the curtains finally closed on Mary's reign, and she left this earthly stage for good. But fear not, the show must go on. Elizabeth ascended to the throne and brought a whole new vibe to England. So how is Mary remembered in history? Well, it's not as straightforward as you might think. Some see her as a tragic figure, a devout woman who faced numerous personal hardships and desperately tried to uphold her religious beliefs. They argue that she was a victim of her time, and that her religious fervour was a reflection of the era's religious tensions. Some even claim that Mary's reign paved the way for a more moderate religious approach under Elizabeth. Others, though, aren't so forgiving. They see her as a ruthless ruler who allowed fear and intolerance to run rampant in her kingdom and murdered everyone who opposed her. Ultimately, Mary's legacy is as complex as the woman herself, and it teaches us the importance of understanding and respecting opposing religious views, regardless of how much you disagree with them. So, there you have it. The end of the tale of Bloody Mary's reign of terror. Well, there you have it. All the terrifying details on Queen Mary I. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe. See ya!